have Lesley Clark, who covers the White House for McClatchy newspapers. She works with Anita, who I mentioned to a few of you earlier, is home with a child because the schools are on a 2-hour delay, and so she cannot be here. And I guess we'll give precedence to being a mother in a situation like this.
Just this once.
Yeah, just this once. But we're very happy to have Lesley here. Lesley is a Paul Miller Fellow from a few years ago. And she's here with McClatchy now. Previously, she was at the Miami Herald, both in Miami and in Tallahassee. And you can ask her, as I said, you should ask everybody kind of how they got here, because there have been some interesting paths. So thank you for being here. George Condon covers the White House for National Journal. How can I put this? George is like our historical, our institutional memory this morning. So George, thank you for being here. George is also, are you on the board or a member?
Yeah, on the board.
On the board of the National Press Foundation, and we appreciate his service there as well. And Tamara with National Public Radio, also a Paul Miller Fellow, and probably has been on this beat the least amount of time among this group.
But or among most people.
Yeah, but hasn't it been?
It's been a year.
It's been. I thought it had been at least a year.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to hear from you, kind of what you've learned over that year, and how you look at it now that's different from a year ago, and if at all.
Yeah, if anything.
George, do you want to start?
Oh, okay. Actually, you got me here on false pretenses. I thought this was going to be a rally for the Buckeyes, but it's okay.
You can make it whatever you want.
Okay. I've covered the White House since. Well, the first event that I covered for the White House was a Gerald Ford campaign stop in the Michigan primary in 1976 when I was at the Plain Dealer. So I've covered 8 presidents. And there's some benefit to having seen what goes before, because every White House staff comes in, and there's a lot of 23-year-olds who think that what is happening, that their president is doing, is the first time ever that it's happened. And you always have to sort of educate them that no, there were presidents before Barack Obama. And I thought of that last night when I wrote a story that we're putting on the site this morning. President Obama and the White House made what I think is a huge mistake yesterday. After doing all the right things last week and stating strong solidarity with the French and going to the embassy, the president should have been in Paris yesterday at that rally. If almost every other world leader of import can be there, the president should have been there. And I thought of... in 1990, on Thanksgiving Day, the first President Bush, before he sent the troops into the war with Iraq, they were based in the desert in Saudi Arabia. And I was one of the poolers going with the president, visiting the troops. And it was Thanksgiving Day, and he's standing in line with the troops to get some turkey at a mobile kitchen that had been set up. And there was a very nervous 23-year-old second lieutenant from Puerto Rico who found himself standing next to the commander-in-chief who had sent the troops there. And he said what the troops always say to the president when they come. They really appreciated it, and he said, "Thank you for coming." And Bush had a very unpresidential and surprising answer, which left this kid very confused. He said to him, no problem. He said, it's what Woody Allen said, 90% of life is just showing up. And he walked away from his conversation with Bush extraordinarily confused. But that is part of being president, is showing up at the right events. And that's something that President Obama has not mastered in his 7th year in office. He has had several times where he's had a candidate who was so good at the theater and the symbolism in 2008 still doesn't really get it. He'd rather focus on on governance and issues and doesn't understand that presidents have to be places. You don't, as they did last week, have your motorcade drive past a VA hospital that became infamous over the deaths, and not be prepared to even answer the question on why you didn't stop in. And that's happened several times. So it's helpful to have seen what went before, and you should always keep that in mind when you're covering is don't assume something has just happened for the first time. But for the first time, let me turn over to.
Well, it's also a good lesson in coverage, and sometimes the story is what didn't happen. Like
Yeah.
that you didn't go is the story, that they didn't go to the VA is sometimes the story. I've been only covered the Obama administration. I started covering the White House in 2011. After being a regional reporter, I came up here in 2006 for the Miami Herald as a regional reporter covering Florida and covering Congress, which was a great way to get into covering the White House, because you will find that you get most of what happens at the White House by covering Congress. The White Houses are pretty good at locking down information and not telling us anything, despite hour-long press briefings. They don't usually have any answers. There's a lot of responses at them. But if you work it on the outskirts by talking to members of Congress, it's a really good way. So if you have any aspirations to cover the White House, definitely become a good congressional reporter, because I think it's a huge boost, and keep those congressional contacts. Yeah, it was funny. We talked to the class last year, and I said that, and then about a month later, I was over at the Hill, and I ran into one of your fellows, and she was like, "Wow, you really are here." And I was like, I actually hadn't been there in a while, but still, it was good to be spotted.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I've sort of struggled with this job because, like, covering the White House is that big, high-profile job that, like, everybody aspires to, that I aspired to, and then I got it, and I was like, wow, this is not as awesome as I thought it would be.
Totally.
And I've sort of come to peace with it by going and spending more time on the Hill and realizing, oh, yeah, actually life is much better if I go to the Hill. I talk to people. You can actually talk to people.
Yeah.
And you do find out things about what's going on at the White House. I do everything I can to get around the White House. So, I am calling, I've like been building a database of people who have introduced the president at events. Or are like the real people they put up as the real people, to just check in later and see how it's going. I called one of those real people last week, and I'm going to interview him later this week. And he was like, "Oh yeah, the White House just called." I'm like, "Huh, that's convenient." I think that part of covering the White House is getting away from the White House. At least I feel like that's the best way that I can do it. But it's fascinating to me, and I kind of predicted that this is what would happen. Yesterday, I saw this thing, oh, Barack Obama didn't march with the people, oh, it's terrible, and I thought, okay, I am having a hard time getting my outrage machine fired up, and that probably means I haven't been covering the White House long enough. Because, to me, those kind of outrage machine sort of stories, I'm like, really? We're supposed to be, like, French president didn't come and march in Boston. Really? I'm supposed to think this is news? And so I think it's just, eventually I'll become a real White House correspondent and realize that that's a really big deal.
Well, Tamara, I'm interested, did your editors have anything to say about it? Did you report on it?
Not me personally. I actually don't think that we did. There was a little bit of email traffic, but I don't think we did. I mean, it's like, we're radio. A picture that's missing a president isn't very good radio. But maybe we're just wrong. It's possible. Or maybe, like, this is something that blows up for 24 hours, like everything else that blows up for 24 hours, and it's going to completely dominate today's briefing. Mm-hmm. And the front row is going to go crazy and ask all kinds of questions about this. And what about the optics? and then it'll be over. And then they'll move on to the next
Well,
thing.
these things do linger sometimes. I mean, the best precedent was probably in 1965, Lyndon Johnson refused to go to Winston Churchill's funeral and wouldn't send, because he wanted to humiliate Hubert Humphrey, his vice president, wouldn't send him. And Johnson's explanation was, he told reporters, "I don't feel as bouncy as I usually do." He had a cold. Now, he was legitimately a little bit sick, but that impacted U.S.-British relations for a year. And until Johnson really made peace and made sure he went to Konrad Adenauer's funeral in Germany. The rest of the world is very nervous about whether America supports them on things and how strong alliances are. So there is an impact. But let me seize on one thing that both of you said. Every White House gets more difficult to cover because they get more disciplined. I mean, Reagan and Clinton were wonderful to cover because they were so undisciplined and they were fighting among themselves. So we were the outlet. They couldn't wait to talk to us and undercut, the guy in the next office at the White House. Bush W was very disciplined. And this White House is extraordinarily disciplined. It is really tough. And you add to that, they have scorn for us. I mean, no White House likes the press, but this White House thinks that we are so 20th century that they can just totally ignore us and just announce things on Facebook. And they were so proud when they announced one event on Facebook and they said 1.5 million hits that day. Well, guess what? If you had announced that press conference on AP and the networks, you would have gotten more than 1.5 million. But they're so blinded by that, they don't think they need us at all. And as Susan Page of USA Today said, how's that working out for you?
But we do rush to cover that then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No,
They
Yeah.
can post it on Facebook then, but it's not like we're saying, well,
Right, but
okay,
yeah,
put it on
but
Facebook.
they
Yeah.
like sort of slapping us. So you're not important to us. We don't need
Well,
you. You
and
can
then
do it secondarily.
Jeb Bush did the same thing.
Yeah.
Put it up on Instagram and Facebook, and there we are, all reporting on his video.
Do you guys, has there been a push beyond complaining about it? Like, is there anything y'all do?
Reporters
Yeah.
complain? We would never do that.
Well, there's a group, the White House Correspondent Association, which is sadly best known for its dinner, but is actually very active in advocating for the press at the White House, and they are very much in the White House's face about access. It's mostly access issues. The White House would love to just send out everything he does as a picture. And
Without
and a
inviting us
caption.
to also take a
Yeah,
picture.
without an opportunity for the press to get in there and at least ask a question. In past administrations, I didn't cover any others, neither did Tamara, but in past administrations, as I understood, the president maybe at least once a week would do something where the press could at least come in and get one question out.
Right.
Last week, there were 0 opportunities, right?
Well, and on the photo issue, but this is not the old Soviet Union where you have official government photos.
Right.
I mean, they are
Well, except that we do.
Yeah, they're trying to cut. They're trying to cut out news photographers to just have that perfect photo go out.
Right. So the White House Correspondents Association does advocate a lot for access, and they've improved a couple of things. I mean, they're constantly pushing, but it's a constant game. I mean, as George was mentioning, each administration finds itself pushing the gap between the press and the president wider, so that the access. In fact, when George did amazing history for the Correspondent's 100th anniversary last year, and wasn't it at some point reporters were close enough to at night they could first of all they could sit in the lobbies and see the ag secretary would walk by.
Well, I mean the classic example was a while ago, but when James Garfield was dying from the being shot at night in the White House, the AP reporter would sit in a chair outside the president's bedroom. And every hour or so, he'd listen to hear if the president was breathing. And somehow I don't think they'd have us at the
No.
president's deathbed
No,
today.
now it's like that movie Dave or whatever, where
Yeah.
he could be dead.
Yeah,
you wouldn't
yeah,
know.
exactly.
Sometimes you go weeks without seeing him,
Yeah,
so they just
yeah.
have the official photo.
Right,
so,
right.
So yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
they've been
yeah.
able to just push for, which is why it's important for the White House Correspondents Association to sort of get in there and push against that.
And they have like weekly meetings with Josh, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
It's
it-
really
yeah,
regular.
very
Depends
routinely.
on the schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, sorry.
I just
Sorry.
want to throw in my most frustrating story of the entire year related to an official photo, which is, I think it was the day that we were going to, I don't know if we were starting to bomb ISIS in Iraq or if we were announcing that we were going to, anyway, it was like some day where they weren't giving us any information. Things were just like drip, 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 drip coming out. And so at some point they release an official photo of the president in the Situation Room. So of course we can't be in the Situation Room, but an official photo of the president in the Situation Room getting a briefing. And okay, great. So then I email and I'm like, I'm hearing reports of possibly 2 of these Situation Room meetings, and what time did these happen, and any other details. And the response I got back was, well, there's a clock on the wall in the picture. It turns out there actually were 2 and not just 1. And so looking at the clock on the wall in the picture was mostly useless, but thanks for the tip. I guess now I'll always look. Yeah, it was a digital clock.
Actually, my favorite response from a White House assistant press secretary, when I had some basic question, and she responded, "Off the record,
Yeah, that's-
I have nothing for you on
Yeah.
that."
Oh, those are the best.
The best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Off the record,
Eh,
no comment.
Yeah, actually, as much as we're complaining, don't get it is a great beat. I mean, the only thing worse,
but it's a great.
the only thing worse than having the White House beat is not having the White House
Yeah,
beat.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the fact that you are there when history is
absolutely.
taking part, it is very exciting, and you're there and you're able to question the president of the United States on behalf of your readers. So
Yeah, and it's
I
always
love it.
big stories, and
Yeah.
there's so much to learn. I mean, it's a big world, and there's always an interesting topic.
I mean,
that
to be
they're
on the
considering.
south lawn of the White House when Itzhak
Yeah.
Rabin and
Yeah.
Arafat were shaking hands and so
I
on.
have a question for Tamara that's specific to your platform. 'Cause we
Yeah.
spoke in the jar. But now, in radio like TV, if you don't have it on tape, if you don't have it on video, a soundbite or anything, it's like it never happened, right?
I
So
mean,
you
it's
have a 4-minute
semi-useless.
Story of nothing but track. How do you get around it, turning a story day up?
Yeah, so, I mean, it can be a lot of track. Or we can do a thing, we call it a 2-way, where the host just interviews me. And I say, White House sources are telling me. And we just talk through the story. I want people on the Hill and I want people at the White House to actually know that it is possible for me to do a story without tape. Because, darn it, I know I'm broadcast, but I do just want the information also. Because I think we can do things with just the information. Obviously, tape is better. And often we get the daily briefing, so at least you have Josh, but it's kind of like, oh, really? Like, we're just going to build a story around a spokesman? That's not very fun. So we try to avoid Josh tape whenever possible. Nothing against him. It's just, he's a spokesman. Yeah.
What do you think they're trying to accomplish by going the Facebook route and the official photo route? Like, why do they think that that's going to be more successful? And what are they trying to do?
Well, it's control. They always want to control things, and it's also who they are. They are very proud of their mastery of social media, and they're very scornful of us, viewing many of us as dinosaurs who think MySpace is still the hot thing. But it always comes back to control.
Yeah, and those pictures that they put out are beautiful. He always gets the best angle. I mean, his pictures are often...
Oh, yeah. Their pictures are fantastic.
They're fantastic. They are shaping the image, and I think that, they feel like social is where people are, and they can put out their message without any filter from us that way, and then they're still going to get our coverage. because it's not like we're going to refuse to cover the president of the United States.
We don't use their pictures though anymore.
No, oh no, we
Yeah.
don't use their pictures.
When did that get cut? Sorry.
Probably 2 or 3 years ago,
Yeah.
people were just sat and realized that with the regular White House photographers were getting cut out of all kinds of situations, but they were still sending out photos of the event. So they just decided. I mean, like Tamara was saying, the Situation Room might be a little bit more difficult. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't necessarily expect to be in these, top secret briefings all the time, at least. But yeah, so most news organizations have stopped using the official photos unless it's,
Though
whatever,
sometimes we
but-
tweet with snark about
yeah,
them.
yeah, that's true.
We'll say, "Oh, look who got in when we didn't," and we'll tweet it.
off the schedule.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned going to the Hill. You can get your scoop by getting all the information, going to the White House and saying, this is, what I know. But, you also see these stories where unnamed administration officials end up confirming the scoop. So how do you guys work on getting a scoop that isn't 100% outside the White House? How do you get the people inside to at least talk to you on background and help build your story out?
Well, I mean, that's something they try to control on the one hand, where they will have sessions that they're often in the Roosevelt Room for select reporters, and they make them deep background, and they
So
get
that's
up.
where all those officials
Yeah.
are.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
in a room
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah,
like
and
20 of us in a room.
And
Yeah.
why it's deep background where you can't even use a quote is beyond me, because
Yes.
they're basically just repeating things. And
Or 20 minutes later,
Yeah.
Josh will go out and talk to
Yeah.
MSNBC or whatever. He'll be
Yeah.
on TV, something
Yeah.
that we can't use the person's name, but it's the same exact
oh, actually,
information.
that drives me crazy. On
it's-
the day of the State of the Union,
Oh, yeah.
we will get background briefings where we cannot use the quote with the person's name, and that same official goes out 5 minutes later to the White House lawn and says the same thing
Yeah.
on TV. But the other part of the answer to your question is you do develop sources. I mean, people who covered the Obama campaign know some of these people. And one of the lessons of reporting is be nice to people at the bottom. When I first met Bill Clinton, he was a driver for Senator Fulbright going around Arkansas. Well, actually, we were students at Georgetown together. But anyway,
And next door.
You can go down a list of senior officials who started out handling baggage for reporters, or running errands or driving or so on. And when I see, it doesn't happen often, but when I see a fellow reporter treat them rudely and so on, I think, boy, you're going to regret that in 10 years. I mean,
Yeah.
so that's an important lesson to remember.
Tamara,
Yeah.
can I ask you, so you've been on the beat for a year.
Right.
When you first got named to that beat and you showed up on the first day, what did you do? How did you tackle going on such a high-profile pressure cooker of a beat? How did you handle that?
Well, so the first day, so I got the job in August. I didn't start until January. So I had a lot of time. I actually spent an entire week just shadowing the person who I replaced. I went everywhere with them. I learned that he's much more efficient than I am, and he gets to go out to lunch every day, and I don't. Still. No, I just want to be that great someday. Someday. But so, yeah, I mean, I shadowed my fellow correspondents. I tried to meet everyone I could. I made meetings with Jen Palmieri and Josh and Jay at the time. I went out to lunch with former Obama administration officials. I did the whole like, hey, I'm the new kid. What can you tell me thing, which now has sadly worn off. But so the crazy thing about this job is you can prepare a lot and you will still not be prepared, because it is as my editor recently coined, and this is like the best description I've ever heard of my job, you have the biggest general assignment job ever. And so you are a general assignment reporter. One day you're covering Ebola, the next day you're covering ISIS, the next day you're covering unaccompanied minors along the border, the next day, you can like you can get any story down, and the next day it will be a different story. And so part of it is being adaptable, part of it is just constantly reading, and reading before you go to bed and reading when you wake up in the morning. And I do read for pleasure books about presidents.
Dustin, you had your hand up for.
Yeah, just in response to the question earlier about the photos, my favorite example of, well, I guess not favorite example, but I think a good example of that is when Malala came to the White House, I think last year.
Yeah.
And they only had White House photography, and what came out was, Obama hugging her, and it was all smiles, and everybody was happy. But during the talk, she asked about the drone program, and she said, the drone strikes, Mr. Obama, are fueling terrorism. I really think this is a problem. But there's no record of that exchange, And so that's sort of like, to me, it seems like that's like very much stifling the debate that could have happened there about, this Pulitzer Prize winning girl who got shot going to school, asking the president about one of his signature programs, and that photo never happened because of sort of past access. My question I wanted to ask to you guys is, talking about sources, can you talk about the effect of the administration's, I guess, war on leakers that we're seeing? I hear all the time that people are just so scared to talk to the press, and is that something that you guys really encounter, that people might want to talk to you, but for whatever reason they just don't because they're kind of terrified of what might happen to them?
I'm not so well sourced to be able to even have people that are afraid. I'm working on it, but it's a work in progress.
No, on the national security front, yeah, they are worried that their phone records are going to be scrutinized. And if you talk to Pentagon reporters, national security specialists, you really hear that. They're very frustrated.
Yeah, and they want encrypted emails, and
yeah,
it's not so much on our part. I don't really find it because like you said, we just don't. We basically deal with a lot of the spokespeople, and they will basically tell you what they've been authorized to tell you. Sadly,
they're pretty disciplined.
Yeah, they don't slip up all that often. And like we were saying, a lot of the briefings are among it could be a room this big, and it would be an off-the-record, deep background briefing about college loan modifications, and you're like, seriously? There's anything in here that people...
But you always have to go.
Yeah, because you might miss something.
And they'll be like, no live tweeting. Save your tweets until after. Yeah. And then I get out and I'm like,
we always walk back.
I don't have anything I want to tweet.
I know. We'll walk back and we'll be like, was there news? Did I miss something?
We'll all walk together.
Yeah.
Is that like a permanent trend, do you think? Or do you think that's like a very specific...
Oh, every administration gets worse.
Because they see it succeeds in the administration that precedes them. So they probably tell them about, these are our secrets for controlling the press.
We need a very undisciplined White House to come in. It'll be our joy.
Yeah.
How do you prepare for presidential news conferences, especially when they're called? I know that he hasn't had many press conferences while he's been president, but when he does have them, how do you prepare, especially when they're last minute and they haven't been, you haven't been told about them? How do you get your questions in? Because it's really obviously competitive to get chosen to even ask the question.
Well, you do want to prepare a question, and my favorite story in that was Bob Schieffer when he was covering Jimmy Carter. These were at those days primetime press conferences, millions watching, and Bob didn't have a question and didn't have his hand up, and the president, primetime, said Bob, and he stood up and he could not think of a question. His whole career flashing before his eyes, and he finally blurted out, "Mr. President, what's the deal with the Soviets?" And it ended up being the most newsworthy answer. So I always figure if I have a brain cramp and the president calls on me, I'm just going to say, "What's the deal with Iraq, Iran, whatever?"
That's like the thing I have nightmares about.
I know. That's funny.
Yeah. But I mean, it depends. If you're in the front row, if you're network, and wires, you're going to prepare a question on what the news of the day is. I know that if I get called on, it's going to be later, and I try to find something that the president didn't answer before and do a follow-up question on that.
So do you prepare two or three questions? in case somebody has asked?
Oh, I
You
prefer
have like
6.
a. You have like
Yeah.
because you just don't George was saying the method that it goes, like it'll usually be the wires, and so you know the big questions. Like if the Soviets are the big deal, you know that the first maybe even first 2 or 3 are going to be that, and so you're looking down at your list and going, oops,
Check,
oops,
check.
oops, oops,
Yeah.
and you get to you, and you're like, whoa. Yeah.
Can I ask a corollary? A couple months ago, there was kind of a big deal presidential press conference, and he called on only women, including
Yes.
you.
December.
Yeah.
So first of all, did you know in advance that you were going to be called on? And second, were you happy about that, or did you feel sort of used? You know, like, oh look, we're talking to women reporter. I mean,
I didn't even notice until
No.
people started talking about
I
it later.
didn't notice until I think I was the 4th woman who was called on. And first of all, before you go to the about an hour before the press conference or so, I got an email because we have 2 people, Anita and I, who cover the White House. So I got an email from the White House saying, "Are you going to be there?" Me, and I said yes. And they said, "Oh, okay, good. Do anything on your mind?" And I said Cuba because I represent the Miami Herald. So I had like 50 Cuba questions on my mind, which I tried to ask them all, and Bob Schieffer called me long-winded, so I'm glad to hear that.
But it was a good answer.
He didn't have any
You got 'em.
questions, so I had many. And we don't get the opportunity, so I was kind of like, it was building up. So I was the 4th, and no, I didn't feel, I mean, if you look at the briefing every day, there are women there every day, and they don't get questions. So I don't know, I mean, I understand why it was a big deal for a story, and that people were like, ooh, the first women and stuff, but I kind of look forward to the time when it's not a big deal, because there are enough women there for them to have 2 more press conferences with
Yeah,
just
I mean,
women.
there were many more of us they could have called
Yeah,
on.
yeah, that's what I mean. Like, it's like, and they go all the time. I mean, these were people who go to the press conferences and sit there all the time, just like the men who go to the, press briefings and sit there all the time.
Yeah. Well, let me pick up on one thing that you said, though, because the White House, by the way it handles press conferences, by the fact that the president comes out and clearly is scripted on who he's going to call on, and clearly doesn't know most of us, you know. So you're sitting right there. You covered the president for 7 years, and he calls your name and looks over there. So it's so obviously scripted. Because they do that, I would bet that 75% of the American people believe that the questions are scripted too, that they know what we're going to ask and everything. And that is not the case. I've never, ever seen any president or White House know, you tell them what the question is and so on. And they might know the topic.
Yeah, I was going to say,
because that's obvious in most cases.
Right, I wrote back Cuba, but not like what it was, and that was kind of obvious because it was 2 days after this, hugely historic policy shift. So I don't think it was a surprise to them that he was going to get asked a question about.
But if they had asked you what your question is, you wouldn't have told them. There's no way.
No.
But George, I kind of remember with George W. Bush, he would what did he scan at a news conference? And I don't remember him having a list. Did George?
Well, every president knows the first couple. Obama carries it way beyond that, and to the point where most of us feel like props there because you're probably not going to get called on it. Every other president, you had a chance of getting called on.
However, he did have that one time when Alexis
yes.
kept her hand up the whole thing very politely. She didn't have it up like this, but she just kept her hand up the entire press conference. And he said, "You know what? You've had your hand up. Let's go for it." He didn't know her name. He didn't know who she wrote for. Had
Even
no
though
idea.
she's at every briefing.
Yeah. But I mean, credit to her and credit to him for at least going outside the box.
And I don't think he was planning to call on April.
Yeah, no, he wasn't. Yeah.
Does it work the other way around too? Do they ever, either at the press briefings or pool sprays, that sort of thing, suggest questions to you?
So I was witness to something interesting, which is I was pool, so I was radio pool, there was print pool, and I can't remember if it was a newspaper reporter or a wire reporter, but we were sitting in the van, and he got a call on his cell phone. We were about to go to an event that was budget related and education related, and he got a call from, I think it was from Josh, and the call was basically like, the president isn't scheduled to take any questions, but if you shouted a question about Ukraine, and you should,
he might
have something to say. So I guess they didn't want to officially take questions, but
they wanted to make sure that he
But
got
they wanted
asked.
to make sure that he got asked that because he hadn't answered. And it you know, frankly,
Yeah.
it didn't matter what question he ended up asking. It was actually kind of funny because then there was this like awkwardness where he wasn't shouting the question, and the president was just sort of like standing there like, "You're gonna shout a question, like somebody's gonna shout this question, right?"
And he did that this fall. He was taking questions all the time. He came. Well, he was leaving for a trip. And,
Oh, yeah.
And he took the pool out there. It was a pool only questions, and he kept saying, "And you, and you, and you,"
Yeah.
and because a friend of mine was filling in. He'd never done
Oh, my
print
God.
pool before. It was his first day ever, and the reporter who usually does it was like, "Oh, don't worry, it'll be no problem." And so instead, he's standing out on the south lawn with the president looking at him, saying, "And do you have a question?" And he was like, he did fine,
Yeah.
but it was.
Yeah, and every president is different. I mean, Reagan was told by his staff, if you get in trouble, they seated on the right side of where he was standing the people they knew would ask softball questions. Either the conservative things. So anytime he got in trouble, he just went to his right, which was sort of his natural inclination anyway. But and Jimmy Carter would intentionally, when he wanted to make us look bad, they know who the nuts are in the press corps. Believe it or not, there are some.
Oh, there are.
And he would call on one nut after another, knowing it made us all look bad to the public.
I know that Josh occasionally like
Oh yeah, he'll go for.
he has like a kicker sometimes on the briefing where he'll be like, "And Goyle," 'cause you know you're gonna get like a totally random question about India no matter what.
Yep.
But it'll also say happy birthday. To
Yeah,
Yeah,
but-
you're
Or
looking
there
good, just a baby.
There was another one that was he called on this woman and she asked, she had been like the whole briefing, please call on me, and then the question was, does the president have a reaction to the tragic circus accident? No one died in the tragic circus accident.
But Bumpo the clown
Oh, that's right. It was
was
something in
injured,
Boston,
so.
I think.
Yeah.
So how do you approach a change in administration? If you cover multiple administrations, maybe you weren't on the campaign trail, how do you rebuild after?
Well, the pattern is a new crew comes in who covered the campaign, and they always, without fail, believe that they're going to have an easy time of it because they know all these people from the campaign, and then they discover that when they get to the White House, the fact that you were buddies on the campaign is not going to always pay off. It will on some stories, but for the most part, it's institutional. If they want to break a story, they're still going to go to the New York Times
No matter what.
instead of the Des Moines Register. And then Vanity Fair did a story after the 92 campaign in which they wrote about this new influx of younger reporters, and they singled out the leaders of the White House Correspondents Association at the time, including me, as mastodons who would be swept aside by the new Clinton reporters. Within 18 months, every one of the new Clinton reporters had moved on to a different beat where they could have more fun, and the mastodons were still there.
Can I ask about social media? Are you all on social media? And do you find that the White House is watching your tweets, your posts, your whatever? And have they called you on it?
Yes.
All of you.
Yeah.
Well, Jay Carney was much more active in calling out. I mean, I think all of us can tell you of emails that we got from Jay in all capital letters complaining about our stories, and this from a former reporter.
continues.
Yeah.
Josh is not as bad, I don't think. Well, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten. Maybe I haven't.
I don't know.
I got one.
They expressed their great disappointment in,
Yeah.
in whatever you've done. And
Well, my favorite was from Jay. What the fuck?
Yeah.
All capital letters.
It might have been more polite. It's been more like,
Yeah, mine
snark
too.
much? Like,
Yeah.
okay, thanks. There was a great one where
yeah, they're always like
yes.
so disappointed. And
Yeah,
There,
yeah.
So there was somebody from another news organization that tweeted that Josh had gotten my name wrong and Josh hadn't actually gotten my name wrong. He just the person from the other news organization misheard it. And I'm hearing from Schultz, principal deputy press secretary, saying, "Aren't you going to correct him?" I'm like, is this like the biggest concern right now while the briefing is still going on? If somebody thinks that Josh mispronounced my name? Really?
What do you think of Eric Schultz?
He's fair.
Yeah.
Do you guys think Josh is better than Jay?
Back in the,
Yeah.
he's different.
Yeah.
How do you try and write different stories from, your colleagues when you're all in the same places covering the same exact topics in such a sort of regimented way?
Well, if we learned any lesson at all from the Iraq War, it should have been that this country is not well served if all of us are running New York Times stories. The New York Times is not always right. We bring independent analysis to stories, different backgrounds. We look at different things. The country is much better off when you have this range of coverage. And also, and I know Lesley especially, this would be true. You know what your newspapers are. When I went with the first President Bush to Colombia, everybody else was writing about the drug cartels in Cartagena and so on. I was writing about what the president was doing on cut flower industry because that was what was important to San Diego, and I was writing for the San Diego Union Tribune. So they aren't all the same.
Do you find that most of the time you are responding with the news of the day, or do you have time for some of these other interesting stories that no one else can?
It's a real struggle because you do a lot of the time find out that especially lately, I mean, the past 2 years has been insane. I mean, nobody would have expected it to be like every few weeks it seems like there's some new crisis or event
totally
or
dominant.
something. Yeah, that's like that you kind of have to cover. So you do struggle to do that because you want to be, like I cover for newspapers and I want to be on the front page, and a lot of the things that the White House does ends up on the front page. But you also, so you'll do that for a while and then you'll be like,
And then you'll
what
feel
did
empty
yeah,
inside.
yeah. Well put. Yes, absolutely. And then you'll be like, my life has no meaning because all I've been doing is writing daily stories, and they disappear into the ether. So you try to do other stories, but then, the other stories sometimes on the beat can be a little bit more challenging to land, to do. Or you'll do, I did it actually last year, I did one of my stories, it wasn't really White House ones, but I was so happy with it because it was like something different, and it got pretty good play, but it was about how the Russians have demonized Jen Psaki for the State Department, and they've just like made songs about her.
Oh my God.
And they she's like on Twitter, they make fun of her constantly, and there's actually DJs at a Russian radio station that did a song, and so it was just like crazy, but it was like so much fun because I was like,
And it had a good beat. It was easy to dance to.
yeah, and the Russian, but it was like I got to talk to the U.S. ambassador to Russia. I got to talk to Jen. I was like, I'm talking to people. And so
and
yes.
they're named. They're
Yes,
named.
yes. So you totally try to keep in mind that, like you said, your soul will be better if you.
Well,
and I feel
do
lucky
something.
that we have at NPR we have 3 people who cover the White House. So I'm only at the White House every 3rd week. And when I'm at the White House, I'm news of the day. I'm the great thing is you kind of just go home at night and you're done with your stories because it was the news of the day.
Until Josh calls.
Right. But on those 2 off weeks, I'm trying to do enterprise stuff. I'm going to spend most of the week in Indiana doing stories about the economy. So I feel lucky.
Coming from the perspective of like a beat reporter that has to cover the White House when it sort of intersects with your policy area, there was some talk. Someone did a statistical analysis of all the questions asked, and like they charted it with the news.
That was me.
Day.
I was gonna say.
That was cool. But there was some chatter of, we should include not just White House reporters in the White House press corps, but beat reporters to throw off the sort of dynamic a little bit. Do you think that would be beneficial? And also, what advice would you have for someone who covers a specific area in terms of broadening, your relationships with the White House on it?
That's a great question. I think absolutely. I think we would all encourage people who haven't been to a White House briefing to definitely come to a White House briefing and get a question asked. There's also, I don't know how many are regional and different things, but the White House has an entire office of regional press. If you don't know the regional person, the head of it is it Keith Malley?
Yeah.
Yeah. Keith can help you out and get you in touch with a person, especially like as it comes in, like this administration, things, it's still a year of action, I'm sure, but as it gets into a new administration, they really, I find they will more focus on the regional because they'll need them especially if you're in Iowa or New Hampshire or Florida or Ohio, those states. So I would definitely encourage going to like a briefing and getting a question asked. And you can always email them and say that you're going to be there and, you're working on a story. You don't have to tell them what your question is, but that you're doing
the general
something.
topic area is, it's helpful to say like, I'm going to be in the seat today and here's this general topic. If it's something that is so specialized that, you don't want to go to a briefing, raise your hand, have them call on you and say, I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Right.
Which
what
don't
about
always.
the circus? Well, you don't want to go and say, what about the circus incident?
Just generally.
Yeah. But if you give them when I worked for the Miami Herald, I would go on occasion because Cuba or Haiti or would be in the news and I might want something. It was more that I would go to the briefings, not the televised briefings, but I would try to get into other briefings on that just to get questions asked. But yeah, it can be very helpful to know them and to talk to them, and so they know who you are.
And I think that if we had, the problem is that this room notwithstanding, regional reporters are becoming more and more endangered. That's the word. And there are just fewer people doing regional reporting. And if we had more regional reporters who could come and sit in the briefing room, we'd probably get better questions. But on a consistent basis, our daily briefings are dominated by television correspondents in the front row who have a very valid and important need for tape and of cutaways of them asking the same question.
That's so we'll get the same question over and over again because they each need to have themselves.
They need themselves asking it. And so because of that, at least like 25, 30 minutes of our briefing is that. And so that's what that's a big cause of the, single topic domination of briefings is that there just aren't very many people in the room that are getting called on that are asking things that are off the main topic. And sometimes like I'll have a question that's off the main topic and I'll wait a while to raise my hand because I don't want to be the circus incident.
Right.
But I feel like my questions are important. It's this balance.
You don't want to bring the room down.
You don't want to be you don't want to be, Josh is getting pounded on something and then you're like, but what about the unemployment rate? You just don't.
Well, it's like I got a question during it was a foreign leader, Angela Merkel, and Obama did a press availability out in the Rose Garden, and I got the first question. And so generally, I wouldn't ask because I'm a print reporter who has newspapers all over the country, and there's a bunch of questions that they deal with that I would like to ask. But I was the first question, and so I asked the topic of the day, which was sanctions against Ukraine. It was more of a wire question.
Well,
but
because
it was
in those settings, you're only going to get 2 questions in.
Right. And so I'm knowing that all of my colleagues will kill me if I ask about, and also it gives you a chance to ask the Merkel something as well, so.
Do y'all have any advice for when you're covering something and you're racing against the clock with other reporters, but you don't have historical context like George might have to just write it and get it up without thinking about it?
Do you have editors with historical context?
Negative.
Well, so you cover the Hill, and there are reporters on the Hill who are very nice people who are mastodons. And when I'm on the Hill, I'm constantly asking people, fellow reporters, hey, just give me a reality check here.
Yeah,
People
totally.
are your colleagues are your best resources, and they're just extremely helpful.
Yeah, almost, and it's the same thing at the White House. I mean, I work in the basement, well, we all work in the basement of the White House.
The basement is the power center for the White House press corps.
It's incredibly, like, we look on TV and you're at, like, White House reporter, that's so glamorous.
And then you go to the basement and there are mouse traps.
There are mouse traps.
And mosquito. I got bit by mosquitoes in my booth
It
this
floods.
summer.
So it's like, sometimes you'll go down there and you're like, what is that smell? And it's just like, you know, like today will be, be
And
Well,
the women's
and-
room always has like a leak from the ceiling,
Yeah.
like even when it's not raining.
And my power strip is by my feet, and I realized one day that there was about 2 inches of water, but I was trying to finish the story, but the power strip was right there. I was a little worried, and I did attend, helping to represent the basement, a mouse summit at the GSA offices to try to combat all the mice.
We should have
down
gotten
there.
a cat.
But we will, that's a great
No, there's
idea.
allergies.
You
Allergies.
join the White House beat by rubber-soled shoes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But
Well, actually, most I shouldn't say this, but because any woman will tell you it matters what shoes you wear on the White House beat.
But and it's hard because you have to wear shoes that are presentable.
Yeah, I don't have on.
I have on rain boots right now,
me
but
too.
I'm
But
not
I'll
at
be
the White House
changing.
today. But because you never know when you're going to get called into the Oval Office.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
then you also need to be able to run from a
Yes,
van.
yes.
In my case, carrying like a backpack and like all this gear, and
Yeah,
as
pool
Emery
duty
knows,
is
I occasionally left things in the van.
And pool duty is essentially. But I was saying that we definitely ask questions. I sit. George sits like I can't see him, but he sits right near me, and so I'll be like, ask a question about, was this the first time? Do we know if what did they do the last time this came up? And
I email Mark Knoller all the time at CBS
Oh, yeah, Mark
because he's
Knoller's incredible.
he is the OCD keeper of all.
Mark goes home
all
at night. Mark
statistics.
spends about 2 hours every single night updating his notebooks. He can tell you not just how many times President Obama has played golf, but how many holes of golf
yeah.
he has played and
who
how
he's
many
played
times
with.
partners have been. He's incredible, and he's very generous. We all credit him,
Yes, we
but
credit
he'll
him.
help any of
Yeah,
us.
so get to
'cause I
know
was-
anybody like that who's been, because chances are they want to be asked about stuff and happy to share what they know.
Carl Hulse and Dave Espo are on the Hill are two of the best reporters around and two of the nicest men,
Yeah,
and they know everything.
yeah, and our David Lightman's great
Yes,
too.
yeah.
And plus, there's this newfangled thing called Google that actually, I mean,
More fun to talk to people.
no, it is more fun to talk, but sometimes when you're on deadline, I mean, last night at midnight when I was writing the story about Obama, I remembered reading about the Lyndon Johnson thing, but was able to research it, at midnight so I could throw a paragraph in on that.
Laura, did you have a question? You were raised your hand before.
asking a similar question.
Okay.
How do you balance when you're chasing something, and I mean we all go through this at various times, but how do you balance where you want an answer on something, but you're not sure you want to tip your hand to all the other reporters in the room?
That's a very much an issue, especially if you're a regional reporter or you're not at the network or something. I mean, Lesley does a lot of stories. Olivier Knox does a lot of stories that are offbeat on the White House, and he doesn't ask those at the briefing. You go in and you talk to somebody afterwards, or you email because somebody will pick it up.
Yeah. Or sometimes what's good if you do ask though, sometimes there's so many people watch that briefing, like even from State Department, and they'll know that you're interested in a topic.
Yeah, that's true.
So that helps out a lot.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
you kind of wait until the last minute if you're going to ask it at the briefing,
Yeah.
and it's something that's like some hot enterprise thing you're doing.
But generally don't ask at the briefing and just
Yeah.
bring it up and, go over there, pick up the phone or email.
How do you deal with covering a lame duck precedent, like the last 2 years, when you know that people are talking about the the ones that are
Well,
gonna be running?
it can be frustrating because you care about the issues and you care about the policy and you see things going on, and your editors just have their eyes glazed over. All they care about is the campaign. Where a problem that is coming up now, that comes up every time in a second term, and it's even more worse now, is presidential travel. This presidential travel is so expensive, and you're in a cycle where people drop off of the trips because it's a lame duck or something, and that makes the trip more expensive. and then more people drop off. And when the president goes to India on the 24th, there's not going to be a charter.
Oh my God, really?
Because
the last one
the
was
last
90,000.
trip,
Right. It was supposed to be 60,000 per person, and it ended up being 90,000 per
and
person.
60,000 would have been incredible. I mean,
And that's just airfare,
it used to be 6,000, and that's airfare. You're right. It doesn't include hotels, where they jack up the hotels to usually $400 a night on you. It does include meals, which meals on these trips aren't really much.
And
but
transportation.
and filing centers and so on. And you go to your editor and say, hey, I got this $90,000 bill for you. The Chicago Tribune bureau chief said that because of that bill, he can't hire somebody this year.
Oh my God.
He's got to leave one position unfilled because of the cost of one trip.
Yeah,
and that was
salary
that was the president's trip to Australia, Malaysia,
Myanmar.
But
Myanmar,
had that
yeah.
happened earlier, there's a possibility that there would have been like much more interest because it's a new
Right,
president
right.
and interacting with new people and what's going on. But yeah, the longer they get, the fatigue kicks in, especially among it, like you said, the editor fatigue kicks in faster, I think, than probably even the public. And so that is definitely going to be a challenge for us to sort of still cover this administration while wanting to move into 2016.
Does that mean that you do less stories and then you can focus like daily stories, but you can focus more on like enterprise and
No,
it doesn't change
Yeah, I'm not.
the workflow.
It hasn't begun to hit yet, I don't think.
No.
But I think also, though, I think because of the series of crises that there have been for this president, that it's a little bit different. But
yeah, you haven't gone yet. Yeah.
Well, I was just curious because I get pool reports in my email, and so I was just curious, how does the pool report work, and who does it, and like what are the things that you cover, and when you're writing the pool report, is there anything in particular you're aiming to do or to write it?
Okay, there's a rotation that's alphabetical by news organization, and so National Journal probably gets the pool once every 33 days or so. I think that's the size of the pool now, and the most important rule of pool coverage is you cannot keep anything to yourself. Anything that you see, anything that you hear, has to be in that pool report, has to be shared. We've had problems, especially with New York Times reporters over the years, of sidling up to aides that they see only because they're in the pool, and we see it in their story and not in the pool report. And at the Correspondent Association, we go to them and call them on it. It hasn't been a problem in recent years. But you are the eyes and ears of the entire press corps, and not just the print. The print, you asked who writes it. The print pooler is responsible for writing the pool report. You send it in to the White House, and they distribute it. And it's very important. It's really the first draft of history.
And most important is just getting the basics down. You're there because everybody can't be there. Like everybody would like to go when he goes to a charter school and talks to it.
Or
Everybody would love to go, but there's
Oval
not
Office.
enough room.
Yeah.
So Oval Office. The whole press corps could not fit into the Oval Office. So you're there. Basically, your most important thing is what is he doing? What is he saying? How does he look? What
Quotes,
time did it happen? And news. The key thing is news. I mean, on the vast majority of pool reports, there is no news. But if he's talking to a charter school and lets it slip that, I don't know, we're going to do whatever in the afternoon, you would send that pool report out with news. This is what's going to happen.
And then cute kids. Or
Yeah, and then everything else is secondary. The color is like secondary to it. But the news stuff, getting quotes, listening to him. I did my last travel pool was in Tennessee, Nashville, and he did he had an event that was an open event, so I just wrote, to the room, whatever. But afterwards, he went to get dinner at this Mexican restaurant, and so they let us in, and you're in there for like 2 minutes. And you're just like, I keep a tape recorder running the entire time around my neck just so that it picks up everything. And then I'm sitting there on the phone, like just typing in whatever he said, and then try to get back into the vans, and we talk to everybody. What did you hear? And he said 2 tacos. Are you sure it was tacos?
Oh, there was a big controversy about the number of tacos.
Well, because
and the
I know
variety.
it was it tacos or
tapas or
flautas or something. There was
yeah.
a huge controversy over the order, and I'm happy to report that the print reporter got it right. So that was, I had to email Josh or whoever was on the trip, I can't, Eric or Josh, and I was like, do you know if it was 2 flautas and 6 tacos? And he was like, really? And I was like, yes, people are asking me.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of stuff. So that's secondary, but it's still important because you just want to hear what's his interaction like with the people, what's he saying to people, what are people saying to him? And it's really hard because you're only in there for about 3 minutes, and you're in there and you're trying to capture it all, and it just seems to it's fun, but it's
Well, and the quality pools can vary widely. I mean, you can find yourself stuck in a van for 4 hours outside, when the president's having dinner with a friend, or you can have a really good. I mean, I had one pool in Rwanda where we got up at 6 a.m. and went on a safari with President Clinton.
Tough assignment.
And my favorite was in '94. President Clinton went to throw the first pitch out at my hometown in Jacobs Field. I'm on the field, and the team I followed all my life, watching baseball. And then that night, I was the pool in Charlotte, North Carolina. The president went to see Arkansas play Duke in the NCAA championship game, and they put chairs for us next to the Duke bench. And all we had to do was every so often look up at the loge where the president was and make sure he hadn't choked on a nacho or something. So they can be fun, but they can also be
and
tedious.
Just for radio, it's a little bit different. I just record the audio, upload the audio to a server, send an email saying, here's the audio. I don't have to pay as much attention to every tiny little detail. I try to send a little bit of color, but mostly they just want the tape to sound good.
How much are you live, if you're on pool duty, how much are you live updating if there is news or something funny happens, like on Twitter or Facebook?
Well, you're not
at
supposed
all
to.
on
You're not
Twitter.
allowed
I
to.
don't do Twitter and Facebook at all on pool duty because, what George was saying, I'm there for everyone else.
Yeah.
So I will just send my stuff out and I'll let other people do because
I send my picture to Mark Knoller. I email out my picture to the pool before I tweet it myself, and so when I'm on pool duty, Knoller tweets my pictures before I tweet my pictures.
Yeah, because the problem
every
with,
time.
The other thing is sometimes, like George was saying, you could sit in a van. So I have my phone and I have 3 backup batteries and I have an iPad and I have my computer, but I'm still terrified that something will happen and all my batteries will drain out and I'll be still sitting in a van and then the president will come out and start talking to me and I'll be like, whoa! And I'll freak out.
These are the things that we fear.
Yeah, so I don't do anything else. I don't if I'm on pool duty and my friends email me, I ignore them. I don't Facebook. I don't do anything while I'm there just because my number one duty is to get out whatever the president's doing, and so I don't want to lose a battery or anything like that.
Yeah, whenever I've had an interview with the president, I always bring 2 tape recorders.
Oh yeah.
What if there's major breaking news? What if something? I mean, you're not.
You
Still,
are the
pool.
pool.
The
You're
pool.
Yeah.
You cannot
Tell
send.
everybody else before you.
I cannot send it to the
Yeah.
National Journal.
Oh,
I
yeah.
have to send it to the pool.
Oh yeah, no, you.
We are there for the entire press corps. We are not there for ourselves.
Yeah.
Even on the radio side too. I mean, seriously, we are not there for ourselves. That's when we get to be selfless.
Yeah, and to avoid anything, I don't tweet anything. Even if he made big news and I'm like, wow, that was cool, it'll be in my pool report and I won't tweet it on the days just to avoid, because the pool reports, that's the other thing. I don't know when the pool report, they can be delayed and it's just.
And often it's really hard to file when you're pool.
Yeah. Well, and also
a lot
it's
of
a great
reporters
excuse
don't.
to your boss.
Yeah.
I can't, I'm not pool.
Exactly.
How do you try and come up with ways to craft questions to either the president or the press secretary to get them to go off message, or be more honest, or whatever? And how often are you actually successful?
You know what works is a very short, direct question that does not. Too many of our questions, because we know how the president's what he said in the past. We ask these convoluted, multi-part questions that anticipate what he's going to say. What it does is give the president time to think of how to dodge it. If you just ask, I remember, a McClatchy reporter, Leo Renner, once asked President Reagan, "What do you think of the Martin Luther King holiday?" He didn't say, "Now you would oppose this," and so on. He didn't give him time to think, and we got a great answer from Reagan because he didn't have time to think about it.
Yeah, as
and we got his honest.
As reporters, we
Yeah.
have to resist the urge to try to make ourselves sound really smart. I think some of the worst questions I've heard throughout my career are the people who are just like, I'm the smartest person in the room, and I'm going to tell you how, and I'm going to explain it in great detail, and then I'm going to ask a question that lets you off the hook. And so, I personally try to ask questions that are not totally obvious. And if you review the questions I've asked in the briefing, I asked them I'm always just a little off on purpose, because if I can get them just a little off, then that's good. Or especially on the Hill, sometimes in the briefing, I ask really pretty blunt questions. If I get a whole bunch of spin in an answer, I'll just say, "Do you really believe that?" as my follow-up. Get interesting answers that way. And the point of that is not to be a jerk, because it's actually pretty hard for me to come off as a jerk. I can't do the big bluster thing because I'm just 5'1". But the point of it is just to make them laugh, get them just slightly off their footing, make them think. Anything I can do to just get them slightly off balance.
Right.
So how important are those $90,000 trips, if you're making a case to boss? And when you see in the pool, Obama stopped by the press cabin for an off-the-record chat, what are those actually like? Are they substantive at any point?
Well, let me take the overall question on trips. As somebody who's been to 88 countries with presidents, I think they're enormously important, and I regret that they're so expensive now that my organization can't go on them. You see a president when he's tired, exhausted, fatigued, how he interacts with other world leaders,
How they treat him.
What the steam he's held in. You see the populace in other countries, what they think about American policy. I think they're really important. And it also helps you with the staff. There's a camaraderie that develops. When you're working, you work hours on those trips that no sane person would. You're 20 hours. You find yourself in a filing center at 3 a.m. First time I went to Jerusalem, we arrived at 11 p.m. It was dark. We left at 4 a.m. It was still dark. So I could say I'd been in Jerusalem, but I didn't see anything. And the staff is working those hours too, and there's a certain kinship that develops where they take you more seriously as somebody who covers the White House and cares about
absolutely.
it.
Yeah, you get a little bit of time to talk with people and.
Have you been on an Air Force One when the president came back?
Not on a foreign trip. No, just on a happy birthday with a cupcake.
It's actually a challenge for the pool because our official pool policy is that you're not supposed to let the president or anybody go off the record because you have to share that with everybody. But that doesn't really work. That's the one flaw in the pool rules where you can't really
tell the president go back.
Yeah, sometimes you wish he'd go back. Bill Clinton on the long trips just wanted to talk and talk and talk, and he would come back.
People wanted to sleep
and sit down, and he'd want to talk about movies and sports, and then they came up with a new rule of deep psych backgrounders, where you couldn't use it. It was just to get an idea of the president's state of mind. And so on. And some of you just wanted them to go back and sleep so you could sleep. But,
yeah, it is sort of.
So most of the time they're not substantive?
It doesn't, I've talked to people who've been in them and it sounds like it's more like he comes back and says, what he gives you his spin on why he thought it was a good trip.
And events about the press.
Yeah.
That's when you find out he really doesn't
why
like
they
us.
didn't cover, he didn't understand why all the coverage was on X when they actually got really significant things done on Z.
And, I've been doing the job for a year. I have not had an off-the-record moment with the president yet. Unless you count shaking his hand at the Christmas party. Or I went with our crew when we did an Oval Office interview, and and so that was cool. I hadn't even been in the Oval Office yet, so we just did this interview, sit-down interview. I went in,
with
sat
Steve
with Steve Inskeep. I sat in a chair against the wall and just sort of
And you talked to him about the circus accident, didn't you?
Yeah.
So when you got on the beat, you weren't introduced. When you got named to the beat,
I went to the Christmas party that year, shook his hand. I actually went to the Christmas party, shook his hand, was bound and determined that I was not going to say nothing. And so instead said, I was like, hi, I'm new, I'm going to be replacing Ari Shapiro. He said, oh, maybe someday I'll have to call on you. And I said, you'd better call on me.
The Secret Service wrestled her to the ground, and it was a mess.
So what percentage of the pool do you think he actually gets to know?
Well, I mean, like the big names who he,
TV people
he's buddies with Steve Croft. I mean, not buddies, but like, the people who he does multiple lengthy interviews with.
And I think the people who were on the campaign, that he knew a lot of the folks. Like, I mean, Christie obviously knows her from Chicago.
Yeah. Every president is different. I mean, Bill Clinton knew our names. When Bill Clinton came back in the first or second year of the Obama administration, and Obama brought him to the briefing room, Clinton called on almost all of us by first names. He still knew who it was, and Obama didn't know 90% of us.
But they're just different people.
They are,
Right.
yeah.
It's just a function of. I don't think it's a sign of respect or not respect. I don't take it that way. I just take it as they're different people.
I mean, Reagan didn't know anybody's names.
Well,
And just their bandwidth too. I mean, I think they have so much bandwidth, and that his doesn't include knowing our names, which is just it's fine. It's not. It doesn't.
I'd rather him understand Ukraine policy.
Yes, me too.
Or Iran.
Yeah, I
mean,
feel,
like knowing my name, not that important.
Right.
No,
I don't need to feel special.
Yeah, as long as Josh or Jay or whoever, as long as they know who we are, that's the important part.
Right.
You're so selfless. I hate to bring this to an end, and in fact, I'm not going to. I'm going to give the privilege of the last question to Jenny, who never gets to ask questions.
Lesley, I want to know if anything changed for you after the Washington Post did that piece last year on you. Did that?
Well, I got called on the next day. The Washington Post did a profile of me. They were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, or the White House Correspondents Association, and the leading up to the dinner. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Leading up to the dinner, and so they wanted to just do a profile of your average White House correspondent, somebody who sits in the third row, in the middle seat, like just
But you're so not
newspaper,
average.
very average, super average, and so, which I completely didn't want to do, but I decided. I ask people to talk to me all the time and put their name on their quotes, so I'll just do it, leap of faith, and it was pretty good, but it focused a lot on how. After several years, I had only got to ask Obama one question one time after 2-3 years on the beat. And so the next day, I was coming in, and I got an email from, was it Josh? It was Jay.
Are you going to be in the seat today?
I got an email from Jay. Are you going to be in the seat today? Because Obama was there with Angela Merkel, and I said, yes. And he said, okay, great. And so we're sitting in the Rose Garden. You only get 2 questions during a presidential press conference with a foreign leader, generally 2 questions. Yeah. And it's just really rare for a newspaper reporter to be called on first. It's not the Associated Press and not TV. So like getting the first question, I was just like, whoa. So that was different, but that was pretty cool. That's probably been about. I mean, other than the security guard at our building saying, "Oh, now I know what you do," because they had read the Post. So those are the 2 big, cool changes. Yeah. But other than that, no. I mean, and to be fair to the White House, like I was saying, it's important for Josh and Jay to know our names. They do, and I could always get a question. The funny thing is the reporter for the Post had come shadowed me for the day and went to a briefing. And at that briefing, like Susan Rice it was before a trip, and I held my hand up and Ambassador Rice and got a question in. So I was like, but that wasn't in the story, so. But that was pretty funny, so.
Well, thank you guys. This is so much fun. I'm going to give each of them the Evelyn Y. Davis mug. This is our new studio.
Excellent.
Which, if you haven't seen it, I know Tamara's seen it, George has seen it. If you haven't seen it,
I think I already have one of these mugs.
Well, you can have another one, or you can decline.
I'm going to
Save it
decline
for the
because
next
I
person.
already have. I don't want to be a mug hoarder.
Thank you guys very much.